So it's a bit hard to talk now because physically this film is very hard. As I said before, I wanted to see this film since it came out in 2022, and I'm really so happy that we got to do this here now in Berlin, especially now. And it's also really good to be here in the Spore, in such an embracing place with so many friends. And we are very lucky to have Noam Sheizaf, one of the directors, with us tonight. You should see him soon on the screen. Hi, Noam.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, very softly, but yes.
Okay, I'll try to speak up.
Okay. So Noam is an Israeli journalist and documentarist focusing on current affairs and on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. He is also the founding editor of the online magazine Plus 972, which I hope that you all know, and of the Israeli parallel Sicha Mekomit. So Noam, I'm sitting with the audience, so maybe, hopefully you can see me as well. Somewhere
yes,
there?
I can.
Yeah, okay. And I prepared some questions, and the question I wanted to open with is somehow, I actually understood it completely by the end of the film, but I will still ask it. Why did you choose to do that film, and why Hebron?
This film has been the product of a long effort by Idit and myself. We started with the desire to tell a story about the military occupation. We thought that the military side of the control over the life of Palestinians doesn't get enough attention in the documentary work and in journalism. There's a lot of work on the settlers, on the plight of the Palestinians, but not about the army and the government mechanism that is in place to control the life of the Palestinians. And we started looking for a place to tell this story through. And if you ever work in documentary, I recommend never do what we did, which is to find an idea and then look for the film. It should be the other way around. But around 2016, the Azaria affair, which you saw at the end of the film, took place. And that brought us to think a lot about Hebron. Now, I served in Hebron as a soldier in the 90s, in the year of the Oslo Accord, which also you see in the film. You actually see in the film a few people from my unit in the archive footage. So when we got there, it all kind of came together, and we realized immediately that the Azaria affair itself is not a story. The story is a bigger story about the history of the occupation, and that's the way to explain the Azaria affair. And Hebron is the kind of place when you can shoot it, you can show it all within one place, and that makes a good film location. But if you ask my own opinion, I agree with what Yehuda Shaul said at the end, that the mechanism in place is not different from what you'll see in a more abstract form or more nuanced form or more brutal form in other places in the occupied West Bank. So this is Hebron. The film came out, as you said, in 2022. When we showed it in Israel in screenings and also to international audience, sometimes I felt uncomfortable because of the brutality and the pessimism of the film. And because the reality between Jews and Arabs is much more layered in Israel. You know, I live in Tel Aviv. There are Arabs who live in Jaffa. You know, there are many forms of relationships. And we showed an extreme case because we wanted to focus on the big issue of the occupation. And I must admit that watching it now, the film seems timid and small compared to the magnitude of the events taking place in Gaza. So that's another form of something I have to grapple with, that none of us imagined that the reality can be so horrifying in such an immediate future.
So I have to admit, first of all, as an Israeli watching this film here in Berlin with all these people, I also felt moments of pure shame because I'm an Israeli, and it also made it very clear to me, this is actually the second thing, because I had many questions that I would have asked if we would have shown the film a year ago. But this film was released in 2022 as this extreme right government was elected, and after the 7th of October, all hell broke loose, and I know that what we saw here was just a taste of what is actually happening way longer than I knew, which is also something I felt watching the film, like pure shame that I didn't know that stuff, or many of it. And my question is it's more a personal question, I hope it's okay, because as an Israeli that chose to leave Israel and to find my life somewhere else, and you are an Israeli and a journalist and politically active and fighting for a cause, and you have a family and you decided to stay in Israel, your life is there. And I wanted to ask you, what's the situation like now on the street in Israel? And I wanted to ask you how you see the future, yeah, something like that.
So right now we're in a moment of crisis for anyone who holds liberal views in Israel. And it's a position that's very difficult to hold. And the crisis is very personal. This war is different. It's the first time that I feel, when we did the film, many times we would have traveled back from Hebron to Tel Aviv, and it's about a 1-hour drive. And I live in central Tel Aviv, in a really nice street. And you would go back after documenting this reality, and then all our friends sit in cafes and invite us to have a beer with them after a long shooting day. And it really feels, you get a sort of a dissonance, because it's very difficult to bridge the gap between the cozy and liberal life in Tel Aviv and what's happening just an hour drive from here. This war is different. I think it penetrates the home of every Israeli and every Palestinian. I think a new reality is shaping here. And if we would have done the screening a year ago, I would have told you that, my fate lies here. That's where I live. That's where my family lives. I don't know what's the future for us now in Israel. It's very, very difficult to imagine what will happen next. We're in a very risky and tragic moments, not just, of course, for Palestinians, and above everything for Palestinians in Gaza. I don't fear for my life every day, but like they do in Rafah or in Gaza. But it is still the sort of politics and convictions that we took, that we can hold as Israeli Jews, are very complicated to maintain right now in Israel. And there's an atmosphere of militarism and racism, and the world is against us and all that. I don't know how long it will hold like that. There's also great opportunity, because people understand the price. Some people understand the price of the conflict and the occupation now. But right now, this moment is terribly risky and terribly difficult. You talked about screening the film abroad. For me, I don't have this distinction between at home and abroad. When I sit in a panel, there are certain things I'd like to say when I'm abroad, and I think I'll say them in a second. But this is a human issue. This is an international conflict that's been internationalized, and Americans or Germans or Europeans have a big stake in it, and recently, especially Germans. I had several opportunities to have political discussions or appearances in Germany, and I never found the climate so. I don't know how to call it, stupid as it is now. in Germany, and it seems that the German government is, or German political arena or even cultural, simply lost it, and terminated the space to have a serious debate about what's going on Israel-Palestine, and also about the German responsibility, historical responsibility toward human rights and toward Jews in particular. So I'm very glad for the opportunity to show this film in Berlin, because I think right now it's very important to take a stand in Berlin that allows a nuanced discussion on the rights of Palestinians, as so many events are being terminated or shut down. So thank you for that.
My microphone was off, so you couldn't hear everybody laughing when you said stupid, because it's like a bit of a compliment for the German politicians. And I have many more questions I could ask, but I think I will leave it to the audience now. If anyone has a question. Yes, there.
Thank you very much for the movie. I have actually two questions. Question number one is, can you maybe go a bit deeper into which trajectory are we right now on when you talk about Hebron? And the second one is, what do you think has to happen going forward so this trajectory is maybe omitted?
So thanks for the question. Things are getting worse all over the West Bank, and we don't hear it a lot about in the news, but because all the focus is on Gaza, but this government has used the opportunity of the war to enable the settlers to make to take over more territory in the West Bank, and even in Hebron, it's a process that's been going on for several times. Like, there are new settler homes that's been added since we completed the film. So if you travel there, the street looks a bit different. There are more settlers there. And there's a lot of harassment and political persecution of Isa, which you saw in the film. And but that's representative of everything that's going on in the West Bank. Having said that, I do believe that this is also a moment of opportunity, because Israel relying on international support and the ability to maintain the war, and the growing opposition to the war in the United States and in Europe is a good sign. And I hope that there is once there's a sort of process of de-escalation on Israel on the ground, I hope there's a strong pressure to move forward with the rights of the Palestinians and with a serious debate on any form of solution, one state, two state, that will ease the suffering of the civilian population and will put us on a path forward. Now, I don't know what the end game is. I'm not a one-stater nor a two-staters person, but I believe that Palestinians deserve the right, basic human rights, civil rights, political rights, and national rights, just like any other people. And I think that we saw the price in Gaza of the disengagement. All the world enabled the 20 years of siege of Gaza. The problem is not the policy of the world now. The problem is the policy of the world in the last 20 years that allowed the blockade and the siege of this tiny strip, and left it to Israeli and Palestinians to solve this, which they obviously didn't. So I hope there is a political engagement. I want to add something. I mentioned the climate among activists and in Berlin and in Europe. There's a flip side to what I said, and I think as a person who has family in Europe and roots in not in Germany but in France, it's also very important to make a clear distinction between pro-Palestinian position and anti-Semitism. And I think on this account, the line has also been crossed several times recently. I do think supporting the Palestinians is more important because they are the weaker side in this conflict. But I think as people who support peace and human rights, we don't need to be naive about the violence of both sides, and we don't need to dehumanize each side. I think what we see in the film is dehumanization mostly of the Palestinians, and what we saw on the October 7 is the dehumanization of Israelis. And ever since that, we've seen a 10,000 times fold again the dehumanization of Palestinians. If we would to make a film about war in Gaza in a few years from now, it will make this film pale in comparison. So I think we need to go back to humanization and to see everyone, Israelis and Palestinians, as deserving of our rights and our support.
First of all, thank you so much for this film. I have a very technical question, and maybe it's not so important, but I was wondering about the choice to skip from 1993 to 1997 and not include the murder of Prime Minister Rabin, and how that kind of influenced both what happened in the policies towards the occupation and what happened within the Israeli society also towards the Jewish residents or this Jewish community that the settlers of Hebron are part of.
That's an excellent question and not technical at all. We wanted to tell the story of the military occupation through 50 years to one street. And it was a very complex decision what to include and what to not include in it. By the way, there were many attacks by Jewish settlers against Palestinians that we didn't show in the film. There were several terror attacks against Jews that we didn't show in the film. Because when you do a film, if you tell an event repeatedly, as it happens in real life, then the audience is bored. So many things we needed to do once. Another thing we asked ourselves was, what place do we keep to the politics of the conflict? So at the end, our focus was not on the politicians, but on the army as a system, and about the people who carry out the orders of the politicians. And so we decided not to touch the Oslo process per se, but just to see the effect of it on the ground. And I think what you see is a very complex picture. That on one hand, there's a hope in the self-government of Palestinians, and more so in simply the recognition of Israelis that the Palestinian people exist and they deserve right. That's the great achievement of Rabin. He recognized the agency of the Palestinians, the PLO. He recognized them as a human being deserving political rights, and that's to his credit. But he also failed to evacuate the settlers, and he failed to solve any of the final status issues. So, and in the short term, the life of Palestinians became actually worse under Oslo than better. So I think you see it in the film. As for the murder, there were several events that derailed the peace process. The first of all, and everybody involved in the peace process admit that, was the Baruch Goldstein massacre, to which we dedicate a long part of the film. It happened only 3 months after the signing of the Oslo Accord, and it wasn't clear where things are heading at the time. And the massacre, and it's very important to put it on the table right now, was what made Hamas start the suicide bombings in Israeli towns. Up until then, they limited their attacks to settlers and soldiers, and which I don't find attacking settlers, civilian, by the way, legitimate, but that's just me. But the bombing of the buses, started after the Goldstein massacre, and that's really what poisoned the atmosphere between Israelis and Palestinians. So we felt that we showed in the film what derailed the peace process. It wasn't just the Rabin assassination; it was several steps along the way. And since we wanted to show everything that's happening in Hebron, we kind of decided to skip what's happening outside the city. But I think ultimately we show dynamics that are true, even if you look at the bigger picture. At Israeli politics, at the Rabin assassination, all that. The dynamics are there. Just several events are not mentioned.
There's another question there.
Hello. Sorry. First of all, thanks a lot for making this movie. I think it's really brave for an Israeli citizen to break that those societal chains and do something completely different, going another direction. I've been to El Khalil in 2020. I've been to that tour with Issa Amro and walked that streets with him. And well, I'm not a history expert, but he told us a story that there was this hotel in El Khalil which was booked by some Jewish settlers as like a holiday resort for a few weeks, and then after their booking ended, they never left the hotel. They basically occupied the hotel. I can't remember its name. I was wondering, because you mentioned the hotel, there was a hotel in the beginning of the movie. I was wondering if that's the same place.
You refer, this is this story. It's actually original footing from there.
Yeah, so that was like, he told us so many stories, like how they took so many houses and buildings. So, yeah, I just wanted to ask that. And the second thing was, oh, geez. Now I'm just blocked. Yeah, in the beginning there was some tour guides, Jewish tour guides. There was like Jewish heritage tours in Hebron, and they were talking about riots in 1929. And they were talking about the massacre, and I felt some context was missing there. Of course, this is a short movie, and you wanted to show something different, I know. But I still felt the need to understand what were those riots, why there were riots in the first place. Because as far as I know, correct me if I'm wrong, probably you know better than me, there were riots from Palestinians in the 1920s and 1930s. There were also like armed riots because they were telling the British, hey, we live here, but now you're bringing Jewish people from all over the world, and they just keep buying land and property, and now we're becoming a minority here, and they start controlling everything. Do something about it. So as far as I know, that was the cause of the riots, but I felt like it was a little bit missing in the movie. Yeah, that was it.
So thanks for this question. You're absolutely right in the sense that many things lack context in the film. It's not just a technical decision. Of course, if we use the context for everything, we would have ended up with a 10-hour film. And but it's not just a technical question. Each side has the narrative, and once you go into the argument of narratives, you're in a different story. And there are many films about narratives. By the way, on 1929 specifically, I recommend the book Year Zero, 1929, by an Israeli historian, Hillel Cohen, who examines the two narratives and the events that happened on the ground. And he claims that the riots in 29 were the year zero of the conflict. But for us, what was important, was to show what's going on, like to show what's happening. We talk a lot about the intentions of both sides, like the intention of the Jews, and are they returning to their homelands, or are they occupying it, are they taking, but we wanted to show to show the action, to see what people do. And the reality was that even if 1929 was an act of resistance against the British government and the Zionist movement, which it probably was, in Hebron specifically, there was a massacre of 62 defenseless civilians. There was no armed resistance in Hebron, and it was a community that existed there for hundreds of years. And there were local reasons also, because there were immigrants from Europe and that joined the community and all that. But eventually, it was like a Jewish neighborhood within Hebron that existed for a very long time. And dozens of people were massacred. And I think, pro-Palestinian activists and people who support Palestinian rights like myself shouldn't try to shy away or rationalize too much the violence that's committed from both sides. I think we should be realistic about wars, and like the fact that if we take Algeria, the rebellion against the FLN, against the French colonialism was justified, but the horrors that were taken against civilians were part of it, and we need to look at it and to understand it and to ask what sort of action we support and what sort of action we're not. And I think this issue, and I'm glad that we did it, because now I think for us liberals and people who support the peace, we need to ask ourselves, how do we treat something like October 7? Where do we place it even if we support Palestinian nationalism or a national movement, not nationalism? I think these are things that are important to grapple with, because if you're too naive about politics, you don't understand why things are happening, and you take the misguided action, and you think you only, if you sugarcoat reality, everything will be okay. And I think that's not the case. I think the people in Hebron, the Jews there, deserve to live, just as the people in Be'eri and Sderot deserved to live, regardless of the fact that I think the siege was a horrendous crime against humanity, against 2 million people. 2 million people. I try to hold these both positions. So that's my answer.
Hi, my name's Sonia. Thank you for this film. I wanted to add to the stupidity of the actual situation at the moment. It's not really stupid, but it's also very horrifying what's happening here. I don't know if you really get this from an Israeli perspective, how German journalists and the climate here is getting really dense for Jewish people and especially for Palestinians. But the other thing is that I wanted to ask is why during when you shooted the film, how was the reaction of the IOF to your film, or the Israeli, the reaction in general of the public, and how was the reaction of people when you screened the film in Israel? How did people, did you screen it at all? I think you mentioned you did. How was the reaction of people?
So regarding Germany, I think this is really tragic, because I think Germany has the potential of doing a debate which is not completely alienating for Jews and Israelis because of a history of German support to Israel, but is yet critical and respectful of the rights of Palestinians. And I must emphasize again that what we see now is like a caricature on the lessons of World War II. As if it all was narrowed down to this can happen again to the Jews, and and Israelis are absolved from any criticism. While I'm part of the universal camp that opposes crimes against humanity per se for everyone. So I think it's important to hold this event, and I support the people who do that. I support you for holding these events. I must reiterate my position that we should be very mindful of not going into labeling Jews or to anti-Semitism, but I think holding these sorts of events and having these debates on the rights of Palestinians is critical right now, and especially in left-wing forums. I think the problem is never just the public. I think the problem is left-wing institutions and liberal institutions and the Greens in Germany. And that's where we should be challenging and trying to have these forums happen. I know that it costs a price to have these sorts of events and to do this, but I think, when you see what's going on in Gaza, I think that's when every one of us needs to take risks and do more to stop these kinds of horrors from taking place. We screened the film in Israel. That's the second part of your question. And then the Ministry of Culture tried to come out against the film in the new government. He even threatened to ask us to return the financial support to which we were entitled by law from the Israeli public taxpayer money. There was no legal basis, so we didn't return it, but we did. But there was a lot of controversy around the film, which sort of brought it to new audiences. So there was the good and the bad with what happened. The reaction, most of the liberal people who came forward to see the film, I think people were genuinely moved and shocked, because even if they opposed the occupation, I don't think they understood how extreme the reality on the ground is. And we wanted, like the Americans say, to show how the sausages are made. And I don't think people realize that. And so, and there was also some attacks from the right, but I think the fact that we used only speakers from the military sort of shielded us, because people trust the military officials more than they trust politicians. So I think the film was, as far as documentary goes, well received within our audiences. On the right in Israel, it's a totally different story, but they would never hear anything critical of the occupation of the government right now. So that's a non-starter to begin with. And that's it. Now we're trying to screen it in schools or academies and abroad, and whoever wants to hold a public events or something like that, because we think this film is still relevant, and we think there's a new generation that's will ask questions about the conflict right now, and we want to be part of this debate. So yeah, that's it.
There's another question from the other side. Maybe I can move the...
Hi, hello. Thank you for the film. During your speech, you mentioned that regardless of the tense situation that is going on now there, it is still a chance or a possibility or a potential. And my question would be, is there on the ground, like, because I'm observing from abroad, from outside, I don't know the dynamics exactly there as you do, is there a potential to create something for all of the people on this piece of land that is Palestine, Israel, where it looks like horrible, and all the fighting and the ongoing genocide on Gaza and all of that? Can we still hope or wish or dream of to have a land where all the humans have the same human rights, basic rights, civil rights, and same freedoms, and a justice for the cleansed and oppressed and wiped out Palestinians for over a century now almost? Or do you think that this is not realistic, or that we need a two-state, and then that might have the implication of needing to do more ethnic cleansing and making purer national states? Or how could you enlighten us maybe on this?
So what I learned was to not to ask myself too many questions about solutions. First of all, because solutions are never static. They're dynamic. You know, you can imagine one state separating to two states, like they did in Yugoslavia, and you can imagine two states becoming one state. We saw those things in history. What we do need is to acknowledge the rights of Palestinians and for political rights. Once they have political rights, either within the states of Israel or in a separate state, they will have the agency to ask and to negotiate the situation. So you can imagine a process where Palestinians have voting rights within Israel, but the two people decides to separate. And you can imagine the other way, as I said. So I try not to have those debates and say that I oppose two-state solution because the ultimate manifestation of rights is only within one-state solution and vice versa. I think that if you talk about the optimal solution, I think I support a solution that's called the Land for All of Us, which is actually a confederacy, which has some sort of right of return to refugees and dual citizenship models. But I think that's a very far-fetched thing because, as you know, in the history of Union, in the history of Europe, in order to build confederacies and unions, you kind of need a 70-year gap between the war and to start new generations that trust each other. And it takes a lot of effort and trust, and it's still an incomplete project. But I want to address another thing you said, and that's the issue of hope. Like, I think that saying, I also stopped asking myself question of like, is there a hope or is there no hope? I think people ask me this question in almost every panel when it comes to the Palestinians. But if you go to a session on feminism, nobody will ask you, is there hope for equal rights for women? Or should we just give it up? It's like, these kind of causes, they never end. They never end. You know, is there hope for black equality in the United States of America? Yes, there's hope. Are we there? No. Are we better off than we were 200 years ago or even 100 years ago? We probably are in terms of political rights. So that's how history works. So I congratulate you on your activism, but I would advise to keep the question of vote outside the debate. Otherwise, we will all get very frustrated.
Any more questions? There's another one.
Thank you. Also from my side, thank you very much for this documentary. And I also wanted to really emphasize my thankfulness to the Palestinian people on the ground who were filming all this footage across the West Bank. I know there's people filming the raids in their homes constantly, etc., etc. So I think these are very brave acts that we should all also acknowledge. So also thank you to them. And my question would be, what is your next project? Yeah, thank you.
So first of all, thank you really so much for this comment. And you see, this is exactly why it's important to speak about agency. We wanted to, you know, I'm an Israeli filmmaker. There's this tendency among Israeli filmmakers to run with a camera after a Palestinian child who's been harassed or something like that and show. But we wanted to show also Palestinians making political acts of resistance and political acts of standing for their rights, not to show them just as victims, but also as proud people with their own politics. And you see people fighting for their rights. You see Issa, you see both the couple of the Abu Shamsia family, which are, as you mentioned, very brave people. There were 6 or 7 6 photographers who used their footage in the film. They are all mentioned in the credits as photographers. I thank you for mentioning them. We tried also to bring them to the screening in Israel, to the premiere. Only one of them got a permit from the military to travel, and it was for us a demonstration that of the true nature of the occupation. So we mentioned them on stage and as further testimony for the plight of the Palestinians and the unequal treatment of Palestinian journalists as opposed to Israeli and Jewish journalists. So what you made is maybe the most important comment of the evening. What am I doing next? So I'm not working on my own documentary right now. I'm working as a researcher and a scriptwriter for several other projects. 2 of them are local projects that are about the October 7 attacks and some of them are unrelated. One of them is unrelated to the conflict, and I'm looking for the next project. This has been a very, very demanding project. It took 7 or 8 years to complete, and 5 of them actually working on this material. The material, just like the material of of what we do now, of the war on Gaza and October 7, watching this material repeatedly for hours and hours is also very, very demanding. Not that I compare myself to those who experience it in real life, of course, but we're thinking, Idit and I, of new angles to work on the story of the occupation. We did several shorter clips, stuff like that, but we're looking for the next story. I'm sure this is something that we'll keep writing and working on, because as I said to you, these kind of projects, they never end, so you should prepare yourself for a very long work, and that's something that should accompany your life, because the relationship between Jews and Palestinians, or between immigrants and Europeans, or between whites and blacks in America, that's not something that's going to disappear, and it's going to have a political element and politics of power in it all along. So I'm sure there'll be a next story, and I hope that I can bring it to you in Berlin in the coming years. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Noam, and I hope that in the coming years you could show something in Berlin like this without being called an anti-Semite like Yuval Avraham and like the Jewish Voice for Peace and like many of us, just because you're criticizing Israel, or just even showing the occupation, which is, it's just purely showing what's going on.
So I want to take this opportunity also to support Yuval. If you haven't seen his film, it's great. So I had the opportunity of watching it and working with Yuval, and I hope you can, once his film is just being released, but once it's shows, I hope you can have a screening as well, and it's highly important.
Yes, it's definitely on our list, and I hope it will happen sometime. Yeah. No doubt about it. So thank you so much again for doing this, and thank you so much again for joining us tonight. And I would also like to thank Muhammad and the whole amazing team of the SPORE initiative, which in these crazy times in Germany and in Berlin are such a safe place for all of us, at their own risk, slowly. Not to be taken for granted, yeah? I think that everybody was very generous with donations, but I have a note to say, please don't forget donations, because we're financing the film series with those donations, and everything extra is going to the children fund of Gaza. What's it called? Palestinian Children's Fund. Relief Fund. There is also a QR code if you want to join the mailing list, and this conversation with Noam will also be online. Noam, I will also send you the link afterwards. Next screening is on the 25th of May. It's going to be Anna's Children About the Freedom Theater in Jenin, which was nominated for the Nobel Prize this year. And hopefully we will have an event through it also. And hope to see you all there. And Noam, when you come to Berlin, you have a place to stay, yeah? Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. Vielen Dank alle. Thank you very much.